Imagine being trapped in an endless pitch-black dungeon. Like you reach out just to brace yourself against the wall, but instead of cold stone, your bleeding hands grab handfuls of sharp rock salt.
And raw, uncut diamonds, right?
Yes, exactly. Raw diamonds. And you try to look around, but you are completely blinded by the gleam of silver coins just scattered everywhere in the dark.
It's such a visceral, overwhelming image.
It really is. And as you stumble through this cavern, you slowly realize you haven't just been thrown into a physical prison. You've been dropped into a graveyard of an author's deleted ideas.
It is a profoundly disorienting place to find yourself because you're no longer in the story. You are literally in the space the story threw away.
Well, welcome to our deep dive. Today we are taking you into a massive labyrinthine collection of fantasy texts.
And scattered archival fragments, too.
Yeah, and philosophical glossaries. And they all hide this one mind-bending secret. The sources you've shared with us today range from, like, the gothic horror of a cursed estate called Northmoor to the quiet philosophical musings of an elven glossary.
But across all these different pages, there is a singular, relentless obsession.
Right. And our mission today is to explore a story about the immense power of negative space.
Yeah.
The power of what isn't there.
Exactly. I mean, when we read a book or even when we walk into a building, we naturally focus on the structure. You know, the words on the page, the bricks in the wall.
The things we can actually see.
Right. But what this collection of texts does is forcefully redirect your attention to the margins, the gaps, and the shadows.
So we're going to unpack how these texts use missing pieces, faceless silhouettes, and a terrifying dungeon known as the oubliette to explain how stories actually work.
And more importantly, why you...
Right, the listener, the reader.
Exactly. Why you are the ultimate key to finishing them.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because, I mean, where do we even begin with a concept this abstract?
Let's start with the most literal physical manifestation of negative space in these texts. It's that dungeon you described in your opening, the oubliette. Now, the word itself comes from the French, oublier, which means to forget. Historically, it's a dungeon with only a trapdoor at the top.
Right, so you throw someone in, shut the door, and they are just out of sight, out of mind.
Precisely. But in the world of Northmoor and its earlier incarnation, Chatton Castle, the oubliette is much more than a medieval prison. It actually functions as a foundational mechanism for society.
Yeah, there's a very telling scene set at Chatton Castle, presided over by that cold, grim figure, Lord Rathburn.
Yes.
I remember this from the notes. It's a brutal scene. He's entertaining these affluent, wealthy guests in a grand foyer.
He is. And right in the middle of this polite society gathering, the groundskeepers drag in a trespasser, a disgraced man named Sir Kilroy.
And what blew my mind here is that they don't hold a trial. They don't march him out to the gallows.
No, not at all.
Rathburn and his smirking guests literally just open a grate and drop him into a dark cell directly below the foyer. Like they sweep a human being under the floorboards so they can get back to their drinks.
It's the ultimate act of social erasure. The text is making a point here, you know? The affluence and polite conversation up above are literally supported by the forgotten, silent suffering below.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a physical representation of pushing things out of the narrative, but the concept is pushed even further when we get to the character of Tasha.
Yes, going back to the salt and the diamonds, Tasha falls into the oubliette, but her experience is entirely different from Kilroy's, isn't it?
It really is. Because Tasha isn't just navigating a physical space, she is trapped in her own imagination. She unlocks a rusted grate and plunges into what the text explicitly names a place of forgetting.
The juxtaposition there is so striking to me.
Right. She is surrounded by unimaginable wealth, the silver coins, the white diamonds, but she is in blinding agony because her fingers are being sliced to shreds by sharp rock salt.
It's just a sensory nightmare, but what is she actually doing down there? Like, what is she finding?
Well, she finds a voice in the dark.
Oh,
It belongs to a desperate man who spent his entire life in relentless study. He chased immortality, basically trying to unravel the ultimate riddles of life, death, and existence.
and he found nothing, right? Just absolute emptiness.
Nothing.
He says his experiments ring hollow and that existence guards its secrets more fiercely than any dragon guards its gold.
Yeah.
He literally dug to the bottom of reality and just found a void.
Yes. And we see this theme evolve again when another character, Clark the Apothecarist, makes his descent into the Northmoor oubliette.
Right.
He's lowered on a rope through this ornate, completely useless brass grate, and he ends up in a chamber where the walls are traced with phosphorescent veins.
Almost like the walls are breathing.
Exactly. But Clark doesn't find a monster down there. He finds something much stranger and, in a way, much more dangerous.
Unfinished sentences. That detail stuck with me. He finds abandoned ideas?
Yes. Ideas that were perhaps too dangerous to debate in the open, or concepts the author just couldn't resolve. For instance, Clark finds the discarded philosophical concept that the self isn't actually the thinker of thoughts, but merely a silent witness signing for their delivery.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
So he finds an abstract philosophical concept physically discarded in a dungeon. If an oubliette is a place to forget, isn't this essentially the author's trash can? Like a writer sweeping dust under a rug, hoping the reader won't notice the plot holes or abandoned themes.
That is a very apt way to look at it, actually. The narrative itself throws the truths. It refuses to acknowledge right into the dark. It hides its own structural flaws.
It totally reminds me of deleting a file on a computer.
Oh, how so?
Well, you drag a document to the trash bin, you click empty, the little crumpled paper icon disappears, and you think it's gone forever.
Yeah.
But any IT expert will tell you the JD is actually still there.
Right. It doesn't just vanish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's still taking up physical space on the hard drives. All the computer did was remove the file's address from the main directory so you can't easily find it. The story is basically hoping you, the reader, won't pull out a microscope and look at the hard drive.
I love that analogy. The data hasn't been destroyed. The pointer to the data has merely been erased. So the negative space isn't actually empty. It is packed with everything the narrative is trying to ignore.
But here's the problem with tossing things in the trash.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, it starts to smell. The deleted files refuse to stay hidden.
Precisely. Nature abhors a vacuum. And in a narrative structure, if you create a massive vacuum by burying the truth, that void starts pulling things into it.
Right.
It creates a gravitational pull. And in the context of Northmoor, this vacuum manifests as a haunting.
Which moves us from the dark basement where things are forgotten up into the main house where those forgotten things are actively trying to tear the walls down.
Yes.
And this brings us to Lady Mavienne and the masked funeral.
Right. Lady Mavienne is a grieving figure orchestrating a deeply unsettling event at the estate, which was then known as Gloaming Rock. It's a funeral procession. But what makes it horrific isn't a dead body.
It's the lack of one.
Exactly.
The coffin at the center of this elaborate funeral is completely empty. It's a pageant, a snare. And all the attendees are forced to wear these horrific masks. Wolves with sockets hollow as wells, skulls veined in gold, cherubs crying ruby tears.
And the text makes a very specific ruling on the nature of these masks. It states, a mask does not conceal the truth. It simply gives subterfuge somewhere to hide.
So the mask isn't hiding a face. The mask is providing a physical house for a lie.
Yes. The text is actively trying to hide its own emptiness. This is encapsulated in a concept from the deep lore of the text, and a Durham phrase, Kevas Nunux, which translates to the veil worn from within.
The veil worn from within. That is just chilling. It's like the house itself is pulling a sheet over its own head.
Yeah.
And this is where we encounter the faceless silhouette standing on a salted sill.
Right. The silhouette is the shape of what cannot be said or seen. But the haunting escalates. Because the ultimate terror in this house isn't a traditional ghost. It is the 13th guest, whose name is Sir Ed Orzos.
Okay, wait. I am completely lost on this part.
It's tricky, yeah.
When I was reading the source material, it says the 13th guest isn't a spirit or a demon, but a grammatical necessity. It calls it the unresolved clause of a sentence.
Yes.
How is a dangling modifier terrifying? I mean, unless you're an English teacher, how does grammar manifest as a monster chasing a protagonist?
It is brilliant, albeit dense metafiction. You have to stop thinking of Northmoor as a physical building made of stone and wood and start thinking of it as a linguistic contract.
A linguistic contract.
Yeah, a story is a promise. If I say to you, if you open that door...
I expect you to finish the sentence. If I open the door, then what?
Exactly. I've opened a grammatical clause. I have created tension. Now imagine I never finish that sentence. The tension never resolves. 12 guests at the funeral leave the clause open. The 13th guest, Sir Et Euros, is the punctuation mark that was never placed.
Oh, wow.
It is contingency incarnate. It is the dread of the unknown consequence.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because when you put it like that, it makes perfect sense. It's like looking at a donut and being terrified of the hole.
Exactly.
Or, actually, a better way to think about it is music. The 13th guest is the silence, right after a really intense song ends. That silence isn't actually empty, is it?
Not at all.
It's vibrating with the tension of the notes that just stopped. You're holding your breath waiting for the next chord, but it never comes.
That vibrating silence is exactly what is hunting the protagonist. The house is a giant unfinished sentence. The curse is the syntax holding the trap together.
So if you're trapped in an unfinished sentence, you can't fight your way out with the sword. You have to break the grammar.
Correct. And we see the protagonist do exactly this during the 13th dance. To break the binding, the protagonist looks into a fractured mirror and speaks the name of the binding backward.
Why backward? And why a mirror?
Because a mirror is the one surface that cannot lie, but it inherently reverses reality. By speaking the name backward into a reflection, it is a grammatical subversion.
Yeah.
The text introduces a paradox called umialase. To understand your reflection, you must acknowledge what is not there. The mirror shows you the empty space in the room behind you.
So by forcing the house to look at its own emptiness, you dissolve the unfinished sentence.
Yes. The text says the clause dissolves into volition, meaning the force structure of the curse breaks down, and free will, volition, returns to the characters. They are no longer trapped by the author's missing punctuation.
It's absolutely mind-bending. The story is literally showing us how it was constructed with these deleted files and dangling clauses, and then handing us the tools to tear its grammar down.
It's incredibly empowering.
But if you're listening to this and thinking, well, this sounds like an incredibly frustrating, stressful house to live in, you aren't alone. But the author doesn't leave us in the ruins of the curse. The text actually introduces us to people who want to live in these empty spaces.
That's the major pivot in the text. We transition from being hunted by negative space to actively, willingly stepping into it. The narrative introduces us to a group of characters we could call the custodians of the margins.
My favorite of these is Seth the elf.
Seth is such a fascinating character. His physical home burns down in a wildfire, but instead of rebuilding a house of wood or stone, he takes up residence inside a library.
But he doesn't just sleep on the floor of the library. He literally lives inside the physical books.
Mm.
He slips into the vacant margins of the pages and the empty gaps between words and dictionaries. Why does he do that?
Seth writes footnotes in those empty gaps because, in his words, hollow spaces echo with possibility. He sees himself as a rescuer.
A rescuer.
Yeah, he is trying to save readers from authors who left too much suspended in silence. He understands that the space between words is sacred, because that's where interpretation happens.
He's like a squatter in the author's blind spots. And he isn't the only one doing this. There's also Edric, a scribe who has been banished to the Clifftop Abbey.
Edric's situation is a profound commentary on history and narrative. He sits in this isolated abbey rewriting the history of the Earl of Northmoor over and over again in draft after draft.
And he's constantly debated by Brother Renier, who is the skeptical caretaker of the abbey's library. Renier is reading all of Edric's contradictory drafts.
Right.
He realizes that because there are so many different versions of the history, the texts are actually starting to speak to one another in the gaps.
This debate comes to a head in a pivotal, beautifully written scene. It's between a young scribe named Idril and the older, wiser Father Legati. They are sitting in a rain-swept cloister, and Idril is deeply anxious.
Because of the contradictions, right?
Exactly. He's transcribing historical tablets, and he's distressed by them. He believes history must be a perfect, accurate record.
And Legati drops what might be the best line in the entire collection.
Yeah.
Accuracy is a candle, usefulness is the sun.
It is a stunning piece of philosophy. Legati is arguing that a perfect, unassailable record is actually a cage. It locks the narrative in place. But a story, with all its flaws and missing pieces, is a door.
Wow.
He tells the young scribe that contradictions are gifts. They are the cracks where revelation slips through.
I have to push back on this, though.
Okay, go ahead.
Legati tells Idril to write the death that tells the truth, not merely the one that records the event. If we connect this to the bigger picture, doesn't that mean all history is just a curated fiction?
Wow.
I mean, the text calls us cartographers of the impossible.
Mm.
But if we are just embracing the contradictions and prioritizing usefulness over accuracy, aren't we just drawing maps of places that don't exist? Are we just making things up to feel better?
That is the exact tension the author wants you to feel. Is it making things up, or is it recognizing that objective truth in a narrative is an illusion anyway? The gaps in the record aren't failures of the author. They are intentional invitations. The negative space is the exact place where you're supposed to step in and participate.
It reminds me of stargazing.
Stargazing.
Yeah, when you go out on a clear night and look up, you see thousands of random dots of light. And what do humans do? We connect those dots.
Yes.
We draw invisible lines between them and say, oh, that's a hunter, or that's a bear.
Right, the constellations.
The stars themselves have no idea they are a bear. They're just burning balls of gas millions of light years apart.
Yeah.
We impose this story. But the shape of the constellation, the meaning, actually comes from the dark space between the stars.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
If the sky was just a solid sheet of blinding, uniform light, there would be no shape, no story. You need the dark space to draw the lines.
That is a perfect encapsulation of what the text is doing. The author gives you the stars, but asks you to draw the constellation. And the text itself uses a very similar metaphor to explain this in a story within the story.
Right. The character Shanchai.
Yes. Shanchai is a storyteller, and he reads his untitled story to two skeptical guards, Joran and Gerulf. In his tale, a figure with no form invites a reader to walk to the edge of a library shelf and simply step off.
And instead of falling to the floor, the reader walks into a floating, infinite corridor of mirrors.
Exactly.
The walls are shimmering like water, veined with shifting constellations. And as you walk down this hall, the corridor asks a question. Where does your being end, and where does the current begin?
And what is the answer the text provides?
That the boundaries dissolve. The wall at the end of the corridor isn't a barrier at all. It's an endless weave of repeating marks. Every single mark is a tiny mirror reflecting a fragment of the walker's own light. The corridor is infinite because every time the reader takes a step, their very presence etches another mirror into existence.
The story grows because you are walking in it.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a lot of ground today. We started in the dark, punishing oubliette of Lord Rathburn, where uncomfortable ideas and people are thrown away just to be forgotten.
Right.
We've walked through the haunted, salted halls of Northmoor, where faceless silhouettes and grammatical ghosts try to trap you in an unfinished, agonizing sentence. And we've sat in the quiet margins with Seth the elf and the clifftop scribes, who realize that the empty spaces in history aren't mistakes. They are doors waiting to be opened.
And the ultimate takeaway of this massive labyrinthine text is actually revealed in its metafictional closing commentary.
Oh, yeah.
After all the dungeons, the ghosts, and the philosophy, the text makes a profound admission. It admits that the final anchor of any narrative cannot exist inside the story itself. A book cannot finish itself.
The story isn't finished until it finds its anchor. And who is the anchor?
You are. The listener. The reader. You are the signature that finishes the linguistic contract of the house. The text explicitly states, and I quote, "Every book that ever tore you apart was only trying to hand you the thread so you could stitch yourself back together differently."
Wow. Think about that. The story is literally handing you the needle. It's telling you that you don't finish reading a book, you exit it with sovereignty.
Exactly.
The negative space, the confusing plot holes, the unresolved endings, the 13th guest, it was put there specifically for you to inhabit.
It shifts the entire burden of meaning from the author to you. The oubliette isn't just a trash can anymore. It's raw material for you to sift through. The terrifying silence after the song isn't empty. It's your cue to start singing your own note. Ligotti was right. The usefulness of the story is what you do with the gaps it leaves behind.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We've explored the architecture of forgetting, the terrifying grammar of curses, and the sacred vibrating space between the words.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. But as we leave you today, we want to leave you with one final, lingering question to explore on your own. Next time you find yourself deeply frustrated by a lack of closure, whether that's an ambiguous ending in a book, an unresolved relationship, or a confusing phase of your own life, ask yourself, is this an oubliette meant to trap me in the dark? Or is it a blank margin, practically begging me to finally pick up the pen and write the ending myself?